Okay, it's 2 o'clock, so let's call the meeting to order. The Wichita Postcard Club meeting for June 5. And today we have Bill Burton from postcardhistory.net being with us, and he's going to kind of man the chat window. And as if you have questions during the time that we're on today about the speaker or something, please write your question in that chat window, and then Bill Burton will ask it at an appropriate time. It may not be until the end when the speaker is fielding questions, but that would be a good place to put it, just so we all have a way of forgetting what we were going to ask. So that would be a good place to place your question during the presentation. Um, let's see. Good to have our monthly meetings here, and we're looking forward to it. I have several announcements I would like to make before we get into the speaker. First of all, I think many of you, or maybe most of you, know that Fred Tenney from Arizona is a postcard dealer, was here at our show for a string of years, and we learned that he passed away this last week. We don't know anything much more than that. Somebody said that his son found him deceased in bed, and what a what a it's very sad, but what a nice way to pass away and not to have to go to a rest home and all of that most of us end up doing. We've learned this morning that Wally Jensen here in Wichita was hospitalized last Monday, and really a thinking of you card or something to him would be great. And also to our friend Zoe Marie Head, who's we've given her address in previous newsletters and so forth, and she would love, I'm sure, to have a card too. We have Now that those things are out of the way, I'd like to give just a brief overview of our upcoming events. We have, first of all, on June 7th, that's pretty soon, that's just this coming Monday, at 6 p.m. Central Time, the Western New York Postcard Club will have their club meeting online with a Zoom meeting with a program called People in the Work. People in the Work place, I think.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
people in the work. And it's given by, well, I've lost my note on that. But anyway, you can read it here. It'll be a fun in the workplace, yes. And that program, keep it in mind, and we'll talk about it just in another breath here, because there's two Western New York programs that I want to tell you about. The second one is next month here on July 10. Dolores Rowe from Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, will be giving her program. Here we are in July next month, but her program will be called Christmas in July. And you just won't believe some of her wonderful, wonderful Christmas tree real photo postcards. And this is just a sampling here, this one that we're showing on the screen right now. But what fun, and we'll look forward to that presentation this next time on July 10th. So be sure to be here for that. Then the next thing I'd like to tell you about is that on July 12th, again, the Western New York Postcard Club and our Wichita Postcard Club are going to combine forces and have a speaker, Michael Langenstein, talking about artist postcards. And Michael is the postcard artist. So this will be an overview of some of his personal postcards, things that he's published. They've been on the racks in the Big Apple. It's just amazing that here we are getting to see somebody and visit with him and hear him talk about his production through the years. And I think it's going to really be exciting and a neat thing to have both of our clubs uh, be sponsoring and be hosting this July 12th meeting. So you're going to get a double whammy next month with Dolores's meeting on July 10th, and then a couple days later will be Michael's meeting, Michael Langenstein on Steen in July 12th. And then we have September 24 and September 25, and those are the dates for the Capital of Texas Postcard Club show in Austin, Texas. This wonderful postcard showing the silver moon here on the left. Just so much going on there. I mean, it's from Votes to Women, all of these great cards showing. And we're especially happy to show this today because the president of the Capital of Texas Postcard Club show is our speaker today. And lastly, we just learned 2 days ago that the Wichita Postcard Club will be able to have our 43rd annual show this year. We had to postpone last year because, like so many shows, they had to be postponed because of COVID. Now, this is the artwork for last year's show postcard. I have returned it to Rick Gary. He is to receive it on Tuesday, and he'll be getting, once he changes the dates from, let's not even think about last year's date. This year's date is October 16 and 17, 2021. So be watching for that, making reservations, trying to arrange to be here. Club members, I want to remind you that anyone coming for the first time, send an email. Let us hear from you so I can send you the list of motels, their email or their phone numbers or whatever. And also, we have a special thing for club members on Friday night before the show opens to the public on Saturday morning. So that Friday night, starting at 6:30, we call it an early bird sales session. And that's where our club members can get in for that night and shop and have fun, shop until they drop. And usually we're ready to drop and turn it over to the guard around 10 or 10:30 that night. But come and enjoy. And we say it's for the club members. But of course, if you have a friend that's come with you, if you have a grandchild, you have a wife or a husband who's not the collector, that's fine. It's just not open to the general public, and we do not advertise it as such. We say ours is a Saturday, Sunday show, but the other way it works. We also have this special time on Friday night for the club members. So all of those things, that's the most announcements we've ever had. But in any case, I'm supposed to breathe, take a couple of breaths, and I want to introduce our club speaker today. It's Debbie Wilson and Ken Wilson, who told me about Richard Eisenhour. And he recently became the club president. There's smiling Richard. But he became the club president of the Austin club called the Capital of Texas Postcard Club. But they told me about Richard and his interest in early Texas postcards. And I asked Mork, well, what else and what else? And well, we learned that he's searching, and that's searching for the earliest cards and so forth. And I just thought that our club membership would enjoy hearing from Richard about what he's going through, what he's found, what he's looking for, and it would be the greatest if some of you just in your cards have something from these Texas towns that he's talking about, and we'll be able to help him after this presentation next week or whenever. His contact information is certainly available from me at any time, and we'd be glad to get you two together so you might be able to share your cards and discoveries with Richard and to help him in his quest. Let me just say that you may be like me and have kind of wondered about Richard's last name, Eisenhower. Well, it's pronounced and spelled the same as our former president, Dwight Eisenhower. Nothing definitive has been discovered so far, but the general feeling is that way back in the past, there must have been a connection. After all, they have similar happy grins and smiles. Thank you, Richard. I want to introduce you and welcome you to this virtual presentation and meeting today, and thank you.
Al, thank you so much. Thank you very much for hosting. For those of you who do know me, you probably know that I'm a native of Galveston, Texas, on the Texas coast. And Galveston is where I began collecting postcards when I was about 13. About, goodness, that's 44 years ago now. And Galveston produced, the cards that came through Galveston, there were, hundreds, thousands of them produced through the years. And along in my course of finding golden age postcards, say postcards from about 1910 to, 1902 to about 1912, occasionally would pop up some strange postcard that predated 1900. I mean, many of you may infamously know Galveston from the Great Hurricane of 1900, which was supposed to have wiped the city off the map. But a lot of the stately structures survived. And anyway, it's a beautiful city today, mixture of early to mid 19th century structures to the present and all ages in between. It's a beautiful city, but it's on a sandbar and it's quite vulnerable to hurricanes and the like. So we're going to continue here. You know what this place is. This is someplace familiar to us. So I thought I would just do a little funny lead in. I hope you find it funny. So we'll just continue. There we go. There'll be a lot of reading in this. Yeah, it's the collection. Oh, it's just in the next room. I'll be back in a jiffy. Wait here, won't you? All right. In this, I thought that it would be wonderful, but I couldn't add the music, that I would love to have a mashup between the Blazing Saddles theme song and the Star Wars opening music, something with the cracking of a whip along with Star Wars, but we're just going to begin here. And I'm just going to read instead of giving you the rousing Star Wars music. At the end of the 19th century, publishers in 2 Texas cities entered into an unwitting rivalry over who would introduce the first picture postcards for the empire known as the Lone Star. Historians would later debate whether it was Galveston or its older, sophisticated cousin to the northwest, San Antonio, that fired the first round, but eventually a passive truce would lead to a surprising fellowship between the publishers that would endure for eons. My apologies. I realize that you can't unsee that Star Wars ripoff, but I promise that it will have a payoff toward the end of the lecture. Maybe. Now we get into the real title, Discovering the Earliest Texas Picture Postcards, and then I add the subtitle 1896 to 1899. You would think that for provincial Texas would have much to cover in those years, but I've discovered differently. And here just want to show you a few samples, but also to remind you, I could not possibly do this work all by myself. I will include picture credits where I can. I've culled from the internet where I couldn't find originals. And but it's the friends, you all, the colleagues, who could provide for me, if you have them, the gaps in the information. And so it covers what we call pioneer postcards, which predate May of 1898 through the private mailing card era and up to just about 1900. All right. So in case you all have forgotten where Texas is located, we are a tiny little state down at the bottom of the contiguous 48 states. And in proximity to where Wichita is located, because Wichita may have forgotten where we are also, Wichita is just a couple of states above Texas. And so Texas is 800 miles across and 800 miles high from down at the point up to the panhandle, and covers 250,000 square miles. But for the cities that I'll be covering, they're concentrated in the eastern half of the state where the major populations are. So before I get into that, I wanted to put the framework of Texas into a larger American framework of what was going on in the field of postcards. First, generally, it's been accepted that it was at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago that the widespread, or the early widespread, use of the tourist souvenir postcard was introduced. Now, of course, there was Niagara Falls, and there were maybe one or two for Pikes Peak, but the World's Columbian Exposition gets the lion's share of credit. And then I want to zoom ahead to 1898, in which the US Congress signed a probationary, what's called Private Mailing Card Act of May 19th, 1898, allowing for privately printed postcards to travel for the same postage rates as US government postals. The US government had a monopoly on the use of its postal cards and penalized anyone who would print their own cards by charging a letter rate for those cards to go through the mail, whether domestically or foreign. Then in July the 1st, 1898, the Private Mailing Card Act actually goes into effect, and that's when American printers started their fledgling tourist postcard industry, proliferating the tourist views to meet a new demand of the public. And then in 1902, the probationary period of the private mailing card ends, and we enter what we all acknowledge to be the golden age of postcards in the United States, in which the postcard age steams ahead. So if we take a look in 1893 at the beautiful official views of the World's Columbian Exposition, what's amazing about what we call chromolithography, where it's actual lithography in colors. Each color that you see required a separate printing process, a separate printing stone, and it all had to be registered together. It's a technically very difficult process. This is one of the more popular, or the most popular series of the 1893 World's Fair. Another card showing a government building. And then I was privileged recently, a couple of weeks ago, to be able to photograph this card as part of a San Antonio family collection of a very prominent merchant family from San Antonio called the Gunters, that ran one of the most venerable institutions or companies of San Antonio called Pioneer Flour Mills, C.H. Gunter and Son Company. And then on the back of that card, you can see that the official cards were put on US government postal cards so that the penalty wouldn't exist where the government would charge a higher rate for a privately printed card. This could be sent domestically. As you see, it was sent from Chicago back to San Antonio, just using the 1 penny postage that you see pre-franked onto the title or the back of the card. And then this came from this Gunter family collection. And now, just to show you just a few, between 1893 and where we get to Texas, we have just dribs and drabs, just fledgling little efforts San Francisco at the California Midwinter Exposition of 1894. Boston produced a beautiful series of multi-views in full color lithography uh, of the views of Boston. That's gorgeous. And then New York City, I would have thought New York City would beat them all out, being the first in everything. But no, it was about 1897 that the most early cards began to appear. And then we have a second timeline, this one focusing solely on the events in Texas rather than the events at the larger context of the United States. And that is that in 1896, as late as 1896, 3 years after the World's Columbian Exposition, Texas had souvenir booklets provided in the major cities, but there were no printed picture postcards, at least from what I've found so far. Then in 1897, this is an example of possibly the very first Texas tourist picture postcard printed in Germany in that full color lithography for San Antonio merchant Paul Wagner. Finally, we get to our hero. This is the lion's share of the story I want to tell today, that beginning in late 1898 to midpoint of 1899, an obscure San Antonio publisher named G.R. Spielhagen, or Gustav Reinhold Spielhagen, took advantage of the new private mailing card relaxed regulations and embarked on this mind-boggling effort to produce 125 separate views showcasing 4 major Texas cities. And then about 1900 onward, we see the beginnings of large cities, other than the 4 that I will talk about, and small towns and hamlets picking up on their own private mailing cards and later postcards to proliferate to a growing demand by the public. Well, by the way, let me please ask you all, could you all give another thumbs up to make sure that what I'm saying and what I'm showing are not lagging behind each other, so everything is keeping in sync and everything? Thank you, that's wonderful. Before there were Texas postcards or even Kodak cameras for the public to carry around, in the 1880s to the 1890s, German lithographed accordion-style fold-out view books provided tourists, and string-tied books, with the visual souvenirs that they craved when visiting other cities and places. Here's one from my native Galveston from 1886 that was distributed within Galveston, but printed by a major lithographer from Leipzig, Germany, named Louis Glaser. And Glaser was a prolific lithographer, both in black and white, showing the town views that you see here. And then for San Antonio, for local merchant Paul Wagner, who produced that one color view that we'll see in a bit, this beautiful large accordion style view book, also printed by Louis Glaser of Leipzig, Germany. Well, in Galveston, we have to begin with Galveston. Most of the story is about San Antonio and other places, but Galveston is my native home, and it plays an important role. I'm hoping that if I do a book on this subject, that Galveston will be part of the larger context of the introduction to the book, because most of this will be about Gustav Spielhagen's 125 cards, which just blow me away. But Galveston is important enough. Galveston in the state is just below Houston in the southeast corner of the state, and we'll just blow that up. Galveston is one of the many barrier islands that skirt the Texas coast and provide some shelter to that large 800 by 800 mile mainland against the storms that batter the Texas coast. Well, in 1896, if before 1897 in Texas, if anyone wanted to send a tourist postcard home to the old country, it had to be self-made. This is a card that I found just a couple of months ago on eBay. It shows using a US government postal card and pre-franked with the postage for a penny for domestic, and then applying an extra stamp to get it overseas. was the cheapest way to do so. Well, the sender made this card in 1896 and decided, well, he couldn't find a printed card, so he would draw his own image of the way he saw Galveston, which is so laughable. There are coconut palms and banyan trees and coral sands and Tonkinese, just like in the musical South Pacific. But anyway, Galveston does not look like this, but we'd love to think it does. This is Galveston from one of its beautiful 1880s bird's eye view maps. It's just a sandbar, as flat as you can imagine. I don't see a single coconut palm. Can you imagine trying to build a metropolis on a very low sandbar? But where you see all that red in the center foreground, that shows that the central business district, which skirts the natural deep harbor of this island city, the central business district is made largely of masonry constructed or brick constructed materials. And then it's just a flat expanse. I found this image online, but at the Rosenberg Library, there's so many. Oh, so string-tied souvenir books produced largely in the New York area, or printed in New York or printed in Germany. This one printed by the Albertite Company of Brooklyn. Printed for local hero to me, Ferdinand Olendorf, who arrived from Germany in the 1880s from his native Germany to establish his own business, which was a souvenir or stationery store in the central business district. And early in 1898, he began producing or reproducing from his earlier souvenir books the first postcards on the island. He was the only one. They weren't grand, but they were the first, and he produced at least a dozen of them. They all look like this. They're all monochromatic. They all have what we would call the Grußaus format, which is a greetings from. In German, it means greetings from. So here we see it in English, greetings from Galveston. No need to put the state. Nobody cares about the state. It's just Galveston. And we have multi-views with flourishes, and then the blank space off to the right is where you would write your message. He put these very cleverly. Instead of sending off to Germany, he had these printed by the same people who did his souvenir books, the Albertite Company of Brooklyn, New York. So he didn't have to pay for getting them from overseas and pay tariffs. But anyway, he put them on US government postal cards to save what I consider his buying public were mainly the German sailors coming in on the merchant ships to trade in the port of Galveston. So they didn't have a lot of money, and it would only cost an extra penny stamp to send such a card overseas. So we have this government postal card, which I believe is known as the UX-14 in the Scott Book of Philatelic Wonders. And then an example of this sent domestically off to San Jose, California, and another example being sent back to Germany. This, a true pioneer, predating the May 1898 Private Mailing Card Act, was posted in April of 1898 and just has an extra penny stamp to get it back to Austria. Well, here's a beautiful view from one of Ferdinand Ollendorf's string-tied souvenir books of the Beach Hotel, which unfortunately burned in August of 1898, but lived long enough to be pictured on a picture postcard using the same photograph from the souvenir book and another view of a bathing pavilion called the Pagoda Bathhouse. Then we have a view of one of Galveston's major industries, the cotton industry, where we would import it or we would export cotton from the mainland of Texas through this cotton exchange. And here you see its adaptation in its own postcard posted out to Germany in 1899. Well, Ferdinand Ollendorf's cards were not necessarily beautiful, but they were the first. And he produced at least a dozen, maybe as many as 15 or 16 of these cards, most of which were being sent back home to Germany rather than domestically within Texas or across the country, because it was the Germans who had the greatest love for these cards early on. In the big cities, maybe the more affluent or the more cosmopolitan citizens might have caught on to postcards, but really it was the German tourists and merchants who were coming over, or sailors coming over. So we move on to San Antonio. We get away from the introduction, and I must talk about now, where is San Antonio? In the center of the state is my hometown now, Austin, and then there's San Antonio, which was established in the early 1700s and remained for Texas such a major cultural center for the state, and is today. In San Antonio, the German-born merchant Paul Wagner of Paul Wagner's Bazaar on the principal commercial thoroughfare known appropriately as Commerce Street. Here's beautiful sort of New York style iron front 1870s commercial structure called Paul Wagner's Bazaar. And here it is in a photograph from about 1890. And the man in the derby hat, that's Paul Wagner, standing out in front with his staff, has a nice big full white beard. And you see him in this vignette. He was born in Germany in 1827, but lasted until 1903. And he produced one amazing Pioneer View card printed in Germany. And by the way, these cards were so big, they're almost continental sized cards, that in order to fit them into what would be American postcard albums, invariably they had to be trimmed off to fit. So if you look in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see Paul Wagner's his publishing information, but he didn't print this card. And what we're missing along the left edge is the printing information of Louis Glaser of Leipzig, Germany. So very few of these cards survive not only in blank or unused condition, but with all of the information intact. This piece comes from the wonderful collection of author and historian of postcards and San Antonio history, Louis Fisher. Well, here, folks, this is amazing. Although not in the best condition, this card in a public collection, the San Antonio Conservation Society's library collection, is what I suspect is the oldest example of any Texas tourist postcard known. It was used in August of 1897. It's one of the Paul Wagner cards. And you can see it's not in great shape, but it survives with just enough information to tell me that this card trumps all others in all dates, including my beloved Galveston, that San Antonio fired that first shot in the Star Wars hack ripoff that I had earlier. And San Antonio and Paul Wagner was the one to produce the very first Texas tourist postcard. Well, let's take a look at 1897 in the world context. We have that one card from San Antonio, beautiful full color. And then if we go take a look at Germany in the 1897, they loved lithography. It was a technically difficult process where each color you see required a separate printing plate, a separate printing block. But I've just decided that, just looking at eBay Germany, for example, in the last month, what could I find from 1897 to show you the proliferation of view cards coming out of Germany in as early as 1897 with beautiful full color. No black and white for them. It's full color all the way. Color, deep color. And remember, each color that you see, each color shift means a separate printing block. All of these from 1897. It just boggles the mind that they could produce something so seemingly easily in the face of us just struggling along with one card. It's just mesmerizing. Well, the lithographic process, as I mentioned, was a technically difficult process, and either it involved metal plates or more commonly, very heavy fine-grained limestone lithographing blocks like this one on the left, put into a flatbed press like the one on the right. The process involved taking a grease pencil and inking or penciling the design onto the block and fixing it in place with a mixture of some sort of gum Arabic liquid that's very thick, mixed with nitric acid to fix this design onto the stone. And then each time you shifted color in your design, you had to ink a separate stone with a rolling pin type roller that had an oil-based ink of red or purple or blue or yellow or orange or black. And then you would have to shift the stones carefully, very heavy stones, as you can see, very thick, so that the colors that you see, to us, we think nothing of digital color. It just comes out like that. Well, the Germans made it look easy, that each color you see required a separate printing block in full color lithography, but they wouldn't just, of course, to make it practical, they wouldn't print just one card at a time. They would print a whole sheet of the cards and then cut them apart to ship such orders off to their clients, so that they would have to trade out the stones and re-ink them so much less if they printed large sheets at a time. So if we take Paul Wagner's 1890 San Antonio accordion album, you can see that Paul Wagner ordered from Leipzig, Germany, that the prints from the album be used for that first color card. Just the vignettes, the 3 vignettes of 3 San Antonio missions are adapted from his earlier view books and very cleverly adapted. There are 5 San Antonio missions, 3 of which were shown on Paul Wagner's card. And here you can see the card again to remind you, to refresh your memory. The venerable and infamous Alamo in the upper left-hand corner. We have Mission Concepcion in the upper right-hand corner, and Mission San Jose in the lower left. Well, that's great. There are only, these are only 3 of 5 missions, and I kept searching forever, thinking, well, this looks like a series card. Maybe Paul Wagner produced 6 cards of San Antonio. Maybe the other 2 missions are on another card. And maybe the beautiful, great big federal post office, and maybe Fort Sam Houston. But no, he just produced 1 card. And what I think was happening is about the time that he came out with this 1 card is when his health began to fail. His wife passed on in, I believe it was 1898, the year after producing this card. And then unfortunately, of course, he passed on in 1903. Now for the United States, we find that Louis Glaser of Leipzig, Germany, I can only find that he produced 1 other similar card for the little town of, well, now little town, Parkersburg, West Virginia. And you can see similar flourishes. And I'm going to expand this card a bit so that you can see, like you would see on the Louis Glaser printed card for Paul Wagner, on the left-hand side, you can see, if I bring my cursor over, you can see it says printed by Louis Glaser of Leipzig, Germany. And that's the same information that you would have found on the Paul Wagner card on the left-hand side. Okay. Well, another early tourist view. This one is not as beautiful as Paul Wagner's color card, but it is much rarer. I mean, there are only a couple of examples known versus several that we know for Paul Wagner. It doesn't look like very much, but the Menger Hotel, by the way, for those of you who are not acquainted, the Menger is perhaps now remaining the oldest business in San Antonio. The hotel still exists, still doing a thriving business on Alamo Plaza. And this card was produced as early as January 1898, a pioneer card with the slogan, the message that San Antonio is an ideal health resort, which was applied on both the front and the back. It required a 2-cent stamp because this is a privately printed card, not a government postal card, so it had to be penalized to go at letter rate. And the backside, 5 vignettes, the same 3 missions as on the Paul Wagner card, and that federal post office that I mentioned to the left, and Fort Sam Houston to the right. And you can see the motto at the bottom, San Antonio is an ideal health resort. This card is so super rare. This one in the collection of Joseph Cooper of San Antonio and his excellent website, thealamocity.com. The last time this card was found, before a couple of years ago, when Mr. Cooper found it on eBay for, get this, $2.50. The last time this card was found was in a very important early postcard book called Pioneer Postcards by Jefferson Burdick in the 1950s, where you can see a very poor, almost photostatic halftone reproduction showing the card, and everyone wondering, where is this? How can we find it? So Joseph Cooper finds it on eBay, mislabeled for $2.50. Bam! Oh my gosh. So about 2013, this is where we get into the heart of the matter. I began to ask Ken and Debbie Wilson and Ned Coleman and many other folks, what was the earliest that you've seen for Texas postcards? When did the widespread use of Texas souvenir postcards take hold? Really, the question I was trying to ask was this follow-up question. What was the earliest use of a Texas private mailing card that they had ever found? We know that the Paul Wagner color card was out there as a precursor before the private mailing cards. It was a pioneer card. Then we have the Minger card, but that's it. And we have a few Galveston cards. But private mailing cards is when Texas tourist postcards really begin. But I wanted to know, in provincial Texas, not New York, not the East Coast, not California, not San Francisco, but in Texas, how early after the July 1st initiation of the use of the private mailing card could we find an actual used example? Well, I began finding some cards from San Antonio on eBay. This one was dated, I think it was June 1899, and then finding others from May of this is May of 1899. Very simple, very plain backs. And let me go back to that earlier image. No publishing information. You find the title, you find the scene, and then in the lower right-hand corner, under where you see the initials AG, which stands for a man named Arthur Ginther, you find a little registration number for a series, and that's it. So it was a big mystery. Why so early? Why no publishing information? And you see that just 2 cents, because we're no longer being penalized. It only took 2 cents to get this to Germany. Then similar cards started showing up for Austin about 1901, 1902, but the same format. Picture, black and white. Title, there it is. A little registration or series number in the lower right-hand corner, but no publishing information. What's going on here? So this card in the Ken Wukash collection in Austin, we find that it passed through the hands of a very early collector in Austin named Miss Alberta Askew, who was corresponding with exchange participants from all over the world. So she says here, I have exchange view cards of Texas, 40 different subjects, mailed separately, Miss Alberta Askew. And this is what she puts in her very measured, almost schoolgirl handwriting, beautiful handwriting. She puts on this, and I wanted to know, what are these 40 different subjects? Oh my gosh, can you imagine? What are these subjects? Well, here's another card from the same series. What's going on? Black and white image, we have the title, we have the series number, and then we have it passing through the hands of Alberta Askew of Austin. Where is she getting these cards? Then Houston cards started showing up, same anonymous cards, beautiful images. Very nice. And then Fort Worth. What is going on here? How early do these cards run? We have the same registration number, a very high number for Fort Worth. This one, number 101. Very strange. Then another series with the same format starts showing up, but this one featuring only San Antonio views and not as nicely done as the earlier cards. These are in half tones, whereas the earlier ones, oh, and they show up with the signature G.R. Spielhagen, San Antonio publisher. And instead of numbers, you find little alphabet letters in the lower right-hand corner. So I began to look and found, thanks to a friend, Eric Peterson of here in Austin, found Gustav Reinhold Spielhagen's full name, and then could look on Ancestry and found this blurry image, this portrait. He was born in Germany in 1865, and like Ferdinand Olendorf of Galveston, came to San Antonio in the 1880s. And then he sort of falls off of the map and falls off of the face of the earth by 1923. But he made his living primarily as, and pardon this low resolution image, he makes his living primarily as a traveling salesman, but he produced all of these cards. His name is not on any of them, but it's based upon the later series that is signed by him that I've been able to attribute him to all of these cards. And they run from San Antonio. I began to wonder about those registration numbers. If you put all those numbers in numerical order, what would it come up with? Well, it shows that San Antonio made up the early portion, then Austin, then Houston, and then Fort Worth. And you have moving on from Houston into Fort Worth, and a number of vertical format views that I just stuck in there so that I wouldn't disrupt the horizontal versions. And so far, with the help of finding them on eBay, and especially the help of you, my colleagues, in your collections, Bruce Martin, Joseph Cooper, from across the state, been able to find 95 of what I presume to be the possibility of 125 cards. Huge amount done in a very short period of time. The series covers respectively San Antonio, Austin, Houston, and Fort Worth, 4 major cities between late 1898 and mid 1899. Just boggles my mind. We find in 1895 that Spielhagen is indeed a traveling salesperson, and he's working for none other than Paul Wagner at his store, Wagner and Cabot on Commerce Street. Then there's Paul Wagner, who I mentioned to you was getting into ill health about the time that Spielhagen got onto the scene. And I'm guessing that if Spielhagen produced some of these views and did so anonymously, he may not have had Paul Wagner's blessing to publish these cards and had to do so on the sly. But to do so many, it amazes me, and it would have been very expensive. Very plain private mailing cards backs, no frills whatsoever. And the first few cards, this is a telling clue, let me go back to this. The first card in the series is of the Pearl Brewery, known here as the San Antonio Brewing Association. A very important tell for this series is that the next few cards all concern this same business. We're not getting into civic landmarks. We're not discussing the Alamo. We're talking about a German-owned brewery. And since Spielhagen himself is a brewer, no, not a brewer, excuse me, a German immigrant, we get to the understanding perhaps that look at this beautiful view of the office interior of the San Antonio Brewing Association, card number 2. And I'm curious to know who would have printed these cards for Paul Wagner. They appear to have been photolithographed. I'm just going to pull ahead for a moment to a beautiful Austin view on a lake which is no more, called Lake McDonald. It emptied out when the dam burst in 1900, but I want to show you the crispness of its photolithography. The next card in the San Antonio series is the engine room at the San Antonio Brewing Association Pearl Brewery. And then the bottling plant, now card number 4. And a card that I could not find in real life and pulled from the internet, It was the short line railroad switching station called the Pearl Station of this Texas Transportation Company. And this is important for a reason. It sets up when, in a moment you'll see, there was a notice in the San Antonio Light newspaper, October 18th, 1898. The city brewery, as the Brewing Association was known in vernacular terms, has just constructed an ornamental little building in the yard where the new electric freight line enters, which is to be used as the headquarters of the transportation company, as well as an office for the car weigher. On top of the little, you see up here, on top of the little building is a sign saying Pearl Station. Well, this tells me that this card could not perhaps have existed before October of 1898. And then we find another card 50 cards in, Alamo Plaza, a card number, I think 56 perhaps. I can't see too well down there. It says Alamo Plaza, San Antonio on December 14th, 1898. The first snow in San Antonio for many years. A rare event weather-wise for Texas, but an important historical notation that Spielhagen had gotten up to printing up to maybe card number 50 by December 14th, 1898. Then one other very important date to note. This is a German-owned beer garden in San Antonio called Muth's Concert Garden. And we have it as card number 13. Well, this is in the Joyce Hopkins collection in Houston. We have an example from the Bruce Martin collection where it was used January 9th, 1899. So somewhere between October 1898 and January 9th of 1899, the lion's share perhaps of these cards may have been printed. Just for the fun of it, I want to show you an early card, again of San Antonio, a German-owned saloon, not the one that was used in the postcard of the week, but from June of 1899, being sent to Germany in English by a San Antonio family member. We have the image of the new post office saloon, another rare image of a saloon, but unfortunately unpopulated. No people in this, but a beautiful image of a very elegant, stylish saloon in the Joseph Cooper collection. Being sent to Master Hilmar Günther, who is about 13 or 14 years old, taking his education in Wiesbaden, Germany. Related to the postcard of the week that some of you may have seen, we have the Mankey Hotel, a German-owned hotel, a very important German-owned hotel in San Antonio, and its lovely courtyard with all of the profusion of palms and plants. And then this fellow, let's see here. Oh, here's the postcard of the week postcard, also of the Mankey Hotel, showing the saloon. And by the way, what's wonderful about the saloon postcard from the Mankey, it's not a stylish card like the new post office saloon with all that carved mahogany. This one is just comfortable. We have out-of-date wallpaper. We have a very old-fashioned overmantel mirror behind the bar that probably dated from the 1870s, and a profusion of ceiling fans and electric heaters, and some sort of 1860s crystal chandelier over the bar. It just looks comfortable and cozy, but it is not a stylish establishment. And even the sender from July of 1899 says, "My dear boy, I doubt that you have ever seen this place, but this should be okay for your collection." Signed, Arthur Ginther, your father. Both of these cards in the collection of Joseph Cooper in San Antonio. And here you see the actual sender of the card, Arthur Ginther, courtesy of the Margaret Elise Ginther Gideon collection here in Austin. We have Arthur Ginther, his wife Elise Ginther, born Elise Gross, and then their son Hilmar, the oldest son, and young son Ernst. And Hilmar and Ernst were often Wiesbaden, sent by their parents for several terms at school. after having studied in San Antonio at the venerable German English school. So the father is writing to them in a mixture between German and English to hone their skills. Here you see images of that hotel where the saloon is located. And by the way, in this low two-story mid-19th century hotel building, this building lasted only, unfortunately, until our fellow here, Ludwig Mankey, died in 1906. And then the hotel was summarily demolished. It only took up 2 stories in downtown San Antonio. And today, some of you may know that this was now the site of the now venerable but prominent, huge landmark hotel called the Gunter. No relation to the Ginther family, but the Gunter Hotel. Well, what I found about these many 125 cards is that the first 15 cards almost exclusively dealt with German American San Antonio businesses. And so we have the brewery, as we saw earlier. We have another beer garden called the Schultz Palm Garden, card number 14. Card number, what is this? Card number 15 is called the Southwestern Park of Konrad Schurmeyer of San Antonio. All German-owned businesses. And what I'm suspecting, oh, by the way, we get to the first civic non-German business in San Antonio is the post office. At least as far as I know, this was the first non-German structure, and it's card number 17. It's a long way before Spielhagen even tackles depicting the Alamo, for example. But card number 17 is the first to show a non-German business in San Antonio in this card series. But then we find in card number 18, which shows the courthouse, something wonderful happens. Spielhagen shifts over to occasionally alternating with what I would call shooting day for night, using the daylight image and converting it to a nocturnal scene with the addition of moonlight and clouds. And I thought, he couldn't have come up with this idea on his own in 1898. Certainly there must have been some sort of precursor. It's got to be from Germany. Somebody must have sent him cards from Germany that would have shown moonlight, simulated moonlight shots. And so, but we find in Spielhagen's series, Alamo Plaza, card number 20, and we see the moonlight variation. Fort Sam Houston Daylight, card number 24, moonlight variation. And finally, he deigns to show us the Alamo and Mission Concepcion all the way up at card number 26 with its moonlight variation. Also card number 26. Well, I began to be curious and thought, let's look in 1897 in Germany and see what's going on with these moonlight shots. Is it possible that maybe on one of his trips to Germany, he finds these cards, or perhaps one of his friends says, maybe you should do moonlight postcards in black and white, but you could do moonlight images. Well, here in Meissen, Germany in 1897 is the castle at Abrixburg. And look here, here's the full version of this card. And here's the same photograph as a moonlight variation in 1897. By the way, I began looking for these cards and kept finding the name Monschien. Monschien, what is Monschien? I've never heard of a town in Germany named Monschien. And there's so many moonlight cards in this town called Monschien, without realizing, of course, that Monschien in German is the name for moonlight. And I was finding nothing but moonlight cards and not a town in Germany. But what I hope you'll notice is that unlike Spielhagen's cards, which are anonymous, if you look to the right of the image or to the left of the image on the left margin or right margin, you'll see that the Germans were very proud of their postcards and made sure full well, whether it was in black and white or color, that you knew who printed it. Now we have a moonlight or Mondschein view of Berlin. But then began to realize I wasn't finding any black and white daylight counterparts to these moonlight views. Of course, it makes sense. The Germans embraced and loved these wonderful color postcards. They're not going to waste a black and white view that's unsaleable when they can do a beautiful full color image instead. The public expects it. They've come to expect full color images, except perhaps where there is a moonlight simulated nighttime view. Another view of Berlin and its color counterpart. So perhaps Spielhagen received earlier images to influence him to doing his rather more inexpensive black and white daylight views and printed on blue cardstock images of San Antonio, Austin, Houston, and Fort Worth in moonlight fashion. Well, in another of his cards, we can see perhaps that he is getting his network together by joining organizations like one called the Beethoven Männerchor, which in German means the Beethoven named Men's Singing Chorus Society. It still exists in San Antonio. And at one time they had constructed a beautiful concert hall, which unfortunately burned and was destroyed in 1913. But the Männerchor was filled with the most prominent German immigrant citizens of San Antonio and made a perfect network for Spielhagen to tout perhaps the funding of this massive series. If we look perhaps of who might have funded it, well, since the first 5 cards have to do with the San Antonio Brewing Association, otherwise known as the Pearl Brewery, who was the owner of that but Otto Kahler? He was the principal investor at the San Antonio Brewing Association. And then let's look to perhaps Ludwig Mankey, the owner of the Mankey Hotel, and anyone in between who might have wanted to have their German-owned businesses promoted through Spielhagen's tourist postcards. Well, now we move on to Austin, where incidentally, we don't have any breweries. And it boggles me why Spielhagen perhaps would have moved on out of his hometown. Why would he move on to Austin, Houston, and Fort Worth? But we see another beautiful view of the short-lived Lake McDonald, which emptied out and broke the back of the beautiful side wheel steamer, the Ben Hur, which had to beach itself to keep from being swept over the falls. There is a moonlight version of this view, but here you see the dam that broke in 1900, not the same storm that killed Galveston in September 1900, but in April. And the writer of this card from December of 1900 says, this dam broke last April and flooded the country for miles around and did a great deal of damage. It used to look like a miniature Niagara Falls and was very beautiful. So, by the way, these views, as I want to emphasize in discovering the earliest Texas picture postcards, this is the first time that any of these buildings were perhaps featured on picture postcards. The Capitol, our own Capitol, incidentally, where I happen to work for the agency that cares for the building, the State Preservation Board, the Capitol featured 10 years after it was constructed and finished in 1888. Here it is, perhaps 1898, perhaps 1899. And here's its beautiful nocturnal view from the collection of Ken Wilson. Look at how lovely that is. And then every town must show an image of its insane asylum. Insane asylum. This was a favorite picnic spot for Austinites. Now, something that's extraordinary from the collection of Ned Coleman of Austin, the only color view in the series. This one boggled me for the longest time until I perhaps realized that it was close but no cigar. Somebody, some way, for some reason, decided to take one of these black and white images and meticulously hand color. So it's not lithographed color, but it's a lithographed card with hand watercolor. It's lovely, but it's not what I was expecting. Nonetheless, it's a beautiful view. So now we move on to Houston, just above Galveston. Just a few cards. I'm not going to go through each and every one of the 125 cards unless you want me to. Say no, please. Say no. The first one in the Houston series, The Knights of Pythias Castle, and its romantic nighttime image. Then we have in the Joyce Hopkins collection of Houston, the courthouse with the carbon arc street lighting out in front, which to me resembles the unfortunate resemblance, should we say, of a hangman's noose rather than a street light. Perfect for the criminal court building. Bird's eye views were very popular in Houston, as well as their moonlight counterparts. And then a lovely pavilion, which you had seen a little earlier. And then we're going to move on to the final city in the series, Fort Worth. This in the collection of San Antonio's George Garton. The first card in the Fort Worth series shows a school building, which the sender says, what do you think of our school, by the way? And I don't think it's a very good image because the school is so much larger than shown. What's interesting about the Fort Worth series is that I can perhaps prove that all of these cards date to 1899, but there are very few examples that were posted before 1904. And the sender on this high school card, a moonlight view obviously, says, since postals are to the fore, I'll send one to you because it suits my literary style. In other words, it doesn't like writing letters. Then there's this card, unremarkable, but it happens to be the only example in all of the 125 cards that I found so far that just shows an architect's preliminary drawing of a building. And it's because when this card series was in print in early 1899, this building was still under construction and not completed until later that year. So it perhaps shows that all of the Fort Worth cards were printed in 1899, but the strange thing of it is that they weren't used until late 1903, and most of them early 1904, 1906. St. Joseph's Infirmary, this is perhaps its birthday view, since this building too was not completed until about 1899. And finally, just to show you from the samples of Fort Worth cards, the principal industry of Fort Worth was its meatpacking industry, its cattle yards. Well, I want to give you, before you nod off completely, because I've gone over long already, is to talk about the reflexive or self-conscious attempt of Spielhagen to acknowledge Texas history and give a nod to perhaps the 18th century Spanish missions, which for San Antonio would represent real history. Real early history are the 18th century missions. Here is a nighttime view of another mission called Mission San Jose. And then if you're also talking about history, we're going to talk about the Texas Revolution. For most residents of San Antonio, of Texas in general, they would look to the heroes, Sam Houston amongst them, Stephen F. Austin, who would be heroes of the Texas Revolution that we fought against Mexico to derive our independence. So Spielhagen in his Houston series puts a nod to history by saying San Jacinto battleground, where General Santa Anna surrendered to General Sam Houston under these trees, April 21st, 1836. And from my own agency, our collections at the Capitol, I want to show you a painting that hangs in the lobby done in the 1890s by William Henry Huddle, showing this fellow in the blue tunic and the white trousers. That's General Santa Anna surrendering to a wounded General Sam Houston, who is lying on a blanket. So from the State Preservation Board. Now, since Spielhagen is venerating the Houston hero, Sam Houston, we include an image of his ramshackle cottage, which somehow in downtown Houston managed to survive long enough to be photographed before it was summarily demolished and replaced by a tall building. A nod to the Civil War in Texas, the last card in the Houston series depicting, of course, since Texas was a Confederate state, showing one of the reunions of the Confederacy occurring throughout the South. This one having occurred, I think, about 1896 in Houston, showing a parade of the surviving members parading down Main Street. And then what's funny about history is that it can be rather subjective. We could look to the unveiling of a new monument commemorating historical events. This one from the Ken Wu Cash collection we'd seen earlier, portraying the unveiling of the Fireman's Monument on the Capitol grounds, July 7th, 1896. Also, let's give a nod to odd Texas weather. We all know about now about our snowmageddon ice apocalypse that occurred this last February. Well, acknowledging another card from the San Antonio series in December 14th, 1898, showing this first snow that San Antonio had experienced. And then in Houston, we have to look all the way back to 1895 to find another snowpocalypse ice Icepocalypse, Snowmageddon, in which a fountain in Market Square froze over. Well, this in Texas is very big news. Spielhagen's heart and soul lay in San Antonio. After all, the first 15 cards celebrated his friends' businesses before he even got into civic landmarks like the post office or maybe the Alamo. But he also could not resist adding afterthoughts to his extensive series, where he would think, oh my gosh, I forgot something. Sorry, Austin, I need to interrupt you. And I just want to show you, don't let this confuse you, but I've just put symbols over the massive montage. The white S's show you San Antonio cards, while Austin's official color is violet for the violet crown of blue bonnets that surround us in the spring. So you see where Austin picks up after San Antonio, but lo, we have San Antonio cards interjecting where Spielhagen has an afterthought and he says, oh, wait a minute. Sorry, I forgot. And one of those is card number 50, 85 varieties of Texas cactus. Well, that has to interrupt Austin, absolutely. And then we, of course, have two cards celebrating the rare snowstorm. There we go. And then we get into a second series. I won't belabor this, but late in 1899, Spielhagen decides to do a second, less expensively rendered series showing images that he had featured previously, but only of San Antonio. So we'll take away the card and just save these images and pull them up later. Here's another card from the 1898-1899 series. We'll isolate this image, eliminate the earlier card, and then bring in the later series where we see him reusing the images, and now we dissolve it into the appearance of the card. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have Spielhagen's name in the lower right-hand corner. Maybe by this time, Paul Wagner, who is in failing health, maybe he went ahead and said, to heck with it, Spielhagen. I know you did these cards. Go ahead and print your name if you want to. And we see him applying that registration series number. Instead of a number, he's just doing alphabet letters. Here's the next series. By the way, he's printing on blue paper. Well, that's what he did in the early series for moonlight cards, but here there are no moons. How strange. And then a card in the Lewis Fisher collection. Since Spielhagen is using images derived from his earlier series, I can tell you that there are images on this later series that I haven't found from the earlier series. So they're out there somewhere. One of those is that International Fair building that you see in the top of this card. And then in the same breath, perhaps using the Walter Worth's Printing Company of New York, Spielhagen does a folding postcard, perhaps the very first of its kind, in Texas. Bob Toll for Postcard History online magazine, online news report, um, featured an article recently about Worth's folding postcards. And Bob Toll was able to help me with some information about this. So thank you, Bob. But you can see the same cards being used for this folder, this later series of cards. And again, we'll find images that I've never found before. This one of Military Plaza, and then we have another one of the still extant San Fernando Cathedral. Well, shortly after 1900, Spielhagen drops his postcard enterprise altogether. He does the 125 cards, he does a short later series, and then he just dumps the idea of postcards completely and gets into real estate speculation. And here you can see from the 1905 directory that he's gotten his own real estate office. And then he gets into with one of his Beethoven Manicore friends, he gets into an enterprise down in South Texas to establish an agricultural and residential community called Flowella, named because the community revolved around an artesian well that constantly flowed. Well, they didn't realize that Flowella and artesian wells across the state would not flow endlessly. Oh, by the way, you see Spielhagen's picture here and the picture of his partner, H.C., I believe it's Heilig, who is going in halves with him on this enterprise, which was very short-lived. And you see an image here from a brochure that was online, but I cannot find the original, showing the flowing artesian well, perhaps in the fledgling town square. Well, I mentioned to you folks, I promised you that Star Wars hack would come full circle. It is surprising to me to find out in researching through Ancestry.com that when I mentioned that a surprising fellowship between the publishers that would endure for eons, I found a very surprising twist in Spielhagen's tale. His first, well, I wanted to know at one point if Ferdinand Olendorf of Galveston, with his early Galveston postcards, and perhaps Paul Wagner of San Antonio or Gustav Spielhagen would have communicated with each other. And it seemed rather far-fetched to me that they would. So we remember Ferdinand Ollendorf's postcards that I showed you earlier. Well, in 1921, we I'll pick up this again. Perhaps I put these slides a little bit out of order, but we have only the second image of Gustav Spielhagen when he applied for a passport to go back overseas to Germany in 1921, citing health issues. Here he is with his family and his second wife, which 1923 is the last time I see of him. I have left something off. I apologize, folks. What I didn't show you is that it turns out that his first wife, Louise, dies in 1913, but Spielhagen does not waste any time in getting a second wife. He goes over to Germany and brings home and marries on board ship a woman named Clara and brings her back. And who should happen to be the witness to the wedding that was recorded in the ceremony that occurred on board ship and then repeated at the Lutheran Church in Galveston, but Ferdinand Olendorf, the pioneer postcard printer of Galveston. So Gustav Spielhagen and Ferdinand Olendorf were, in fact, buddies, at least enough for Ferdinand Olendorf to serve in the honor of being a witness at Spielhagen's second marriage. If there was close competition after Spielhagen got into the real estate business, it was the venerable postcard producer or publisher named Nicholas or Nick Ting. And here is a rare image of Nick Ting, who had his business also on Commerce Street. this courtesy of the Library of the Daughters of the Republic of Texas. Nick Ting got into cards very similar to Spielhagen's, but in this case, Nick Ting signed every card he produced. These produced through the Albertite Company of Brooklyn. Here's another example, And then he gets into color cards. He gets into white border cards from about World War I. He gets into 1920s color cards. And he survives, well, he himself passes in 1927, but his family continues to produce under his name until 1950. So my concluding questions, I would love to know if you can help me in any way, what are the other 30 missing subjects? And I'll be happy if you'll write me to send you, either email you or send you a printed version of the current checklist showing the 95 known subjects, and love to know what the other 30 are. Question number 2, who would have printed these anonymously printed cards that are done so beautifully, even in black and white in photolithography? And third, why did Spielhagen decide to branch out from San Antonio to feature 3 other Texas cities that were not his? It could have to do with his German associations of brewers that would have been in Houston and Fort Worth, and maybe Austin was just along for the ride because it was the state's capital. I must very much gratefully acknowledge, and these will be in the chat section as well, the following individuals and entities in alphabetical order: Ancestry.com, my friend James Anderson, who helped with information, Ned Coleman of Austin, Joseph Cooper in the AlamoCity.com, which I highly recommend you visit, David Crockett Collection. We go on, the Daughters of the Republic of Texas Collection in San Antonio, Lewis F. Fisher Collection, the George Garton Collection, thank you, George, the Margaret Elise Gunther Gideon Family Collection, Joyce Hopkins of Houston, and Susan Lane. I very much would have loved to have put you in if I had recalled. I apologize. So Joyce Hopkins, yes, that Joyce Hopkins, the president of the Houston Area Postcard Club. And let's see here, Bruce Martin, San Antonio Conservation Society Library for having that oldest known Texas tourist postcard, the Charlie Stotts collection that had most of the Pearl Brewery cards, Shiloh's Delicatessen, wonderful deli on Commerce Street, which has a wonderful early postcard collection framed on its walls, the State Preservation Board where I work, Bob Toll, thank you, Ken Wilson collection, and finally, the Ken Wukash collection, not related to Ken Wilson, but a similar sort of a name. And then important online links, you might consider visiting the alamocity.com for a comprehensive, huge, many thousands cards of early San Antonio up through Hemisphere in 1968 and even to the 1980s. The Capital Texas Postcard Club, of which I have been made the new president, much to my chagrin. And then we have postcardhistory.net, excellent, almost daily scholarship on early postcards. Maybe it's weekly, but it's wonderful. The San Antonio Conservation Society, and then the State Preservation Board. Have I already mentioned that? Why did I put that in twice? I don't know. Check out the following Facebook groups: the Houston Area Postcard Club as a Facebook group. And I must let you know that in trying to put the San Antonio and South Texas Postcard Club Facebook group on my links section in the chat room, we kept coming up with the Capital of Texas Postcard Club website instead. So my apologies to Kathy Beer and to George Garton that we were unsuccessful in being able to include that link. So now, if you have any information on Spielhagen and would like to contact me, maybe any cards, variations, what is your earliest date of a card you might have? Anything, I would love to know. I do not know where all these cards are, and I would love to see moonlight, daylight, early date postmarks, whatever it is. I don't care what condition. Please email me at 7footrichard@gmail.com. I'm only 6 feet 8 inches tall, but I thought it was best to round up. I'll please, when I do a book, I'll be happy to give you full picture credits like you saw in this presentation. And happy to give you a full acknowledgement. So I thank you all so very much. And now I'll be happy to take your questions.
Very, very nice, Richard. Thank you so much. Bill Burton, do we have any questions today?
Trying to unmute myself, but here we go. Richard actually took care of absolutely everything that Alan had put on the chat window. But if you want to go back to it, it's probably a little bit easier to go there than back to Richard's long listing of Star Wars based websites. But Richard has also put his email address in the chat room, and it's interesting to see that he wrote number 7 foot, not SEVEN.
That's right.
Foot, and that's because I know from my own purposes that I'll write SEVEN sometimes and it'll bounce. So beyond that, we don't have anything that's arrived in the chat room beyond this. But I myself, no, well, that may be. I'll leave that to you. But the ability to pull all this together and keep it from running for 2 days long is pretty impressive. And I personally want to thank you, and I think everybody else should too. We're not unmuted yet, but if everybody would give Richard a thumbs up just to show how much we appreciate him, I think that'd be a great idea.
And
all right.
This is Dennis.
Al, over to you. Oh, sorry.
Dennis?
Dennis McBurney. I unmuted myself.
Oh, hi, Dennis.
I did put it in chat, but I think it was just generally done. There's a museum and collection application and also a website called Catalog It.
Yes.
And I had been approached early on about trying to help them out identifying what attributes they needed on Postcard. And they've moved on. They've done quite a bit of work with that. But other than myself, I'm not aware if anybody has been using Catalog It for the kind of documentation that you have shared today.
Could you spell Catalog It? Is it with an UE or not?
It's American English. CATALOGIT is usually capitalized. It's in the chat.
Is it .com or .org or?
Google it.
You can Google it. I think it's a .com because it is. They do have various levels, so museums can pay a few $100s a year for hosting all of their images.
Oh.
But yeah, CATALOGIT, and I use the application, or I've started to use some of that for some of our postcards. The checklists that we used to put together are great for their time, but now more and more people are going to the websites, and I'm leaning towards that way with the Conard checklist. I'm still going to put a checklist together, but I also think it would be good to go ahead and get some of this out on various collection websites. So with this group of 20 plus people, and Richard, with your expertise out of historical, I was curious if anybody knew about that, had used it.
Well, I'll put that into our news and noteworthy section next week on postcard history, and
Okay, Bill.
see if we can give them a plug.
All right.
We at the State Preservation Board use another program. There are several programs out there. The main difficulty is, can you find a program that everyone would adopt, or at least that a consortium of museums could adapt or
Right.
print from each other to make things applicable across the board, so that apples to apples and oranges to oranges. And that's the difficulty. I had not heard of Catalog It and will be thrilled to investigate it. So thank you so much, Dennis.
Very good. Do we have any other questions or comments?
Oh, we're all set. Thank you, Hal.
Wow.
Okay. I wanted to say that our presentation will be posted on Facebook and YouTube probably in a few days. So watch for it or be able to refer others who may have missed today that they would be able to see it. And that's part of our program is to spread information and to work together and, learn a little bit. And we've done a lot of that through this COVID time, and we can we think that anyway we'll probably continue with these monthly programs this way. We may also go back to a or go and also do a monthly meeting at our library, but we get so much more play and enthusiasm here online than we do at our monthly meetings. But that's our problem. And so we'll see how things go. I just want to thank everybody, Bill, for postcardhistory.net. Uh, I think that most of you are like me and know of this and see these articles. And Ray Hahn is the editor and does just a beautiful job week after week after week. It's great. Be watching for Phil McDaniel's newsletter for July about the link and everything to get to the July meeting for Dolores Rowe. And also look for us. I won't go through the other things we talked about earlier, but we'll hope to see you for two of those Western New York and Wichita Postcard Club combined meetings and efforts. Again, to do what we can to enjoy the hobby and further information. And golly, this was a great day here today. And we sure do thank you, Richard and Ken and Debbie and everybody for all of your participation and staying here. So without that, thanks so much. And we'll hope to see you next month or sooner.
Excellent.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.